Hello, in this video, I'll take you through our income and expense tracker template. Now this template is for service businesses, that's businesses that offer services. So on the screen, I've opened up the template and it's powered with Microsoft Excel. So once you have Microsoft Excel installed on your computer, preferably a version from 2013, all the functionalities will work. Now once you open up the document, you arrive at the dashboard, and this holds 3 thumbnails to navigate to the 3 major sections of the template. We have the service section where the user adds new services, the sales section where the user documents daily sales, and the report section where you can view multiple automatically generated reports. Now in this video, I'm going to go through all the sections. I'm going to start with the first, which is service. Now to open up a particular section, you simply click on the thumbnail. So notice as I click on service, it takes me to the service section. So now we're in the service information section. Now all sections of this template have been formatted identically. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the section title that tells the user at any point in time the section you're currently on. So notice it says service information. So you know this is where you document all the services you render. Now by services, we mean once your business doesn't sell physical products, then you're a service business. So once you offer intangible products, examples include consultant services, educational services, IT professionals like web developers, graphic designers, cleaning services, the list is endless. Once you don't sell physical products, then you offer a service. DesignVAT is a service business. So we design templates and we don't have X amount of templates. We don't do restocks. We don't run an inventory. So once you don't sell physical products, you offer services. So this is where you list all the services that you render. To the right of this, we have 2 buttons, to add a new service and to delete an existing service. Above this, we have a navigation pane with additional labels to navigate to other sections of the template. You simply click on a label, for instance, dashboard, and that takes us back to the dashboard section. So all the labels take you to a particular section of the template. Below the 2 buttons here, we have our data table, and this is where all the services you render are going to be listed. You notice at the top we have column headers. These are the attributes that the user is expected to supply. Now to add a new service, you simply click the Add Service button, and this pops up a data form. Now data forms provide a simpler way to store data to this data table here. So you notice that all the column headers are equally listed on the form as labels. The user simply has to supply values to the white portion of the form. So first, you indicate the service category. Now it's assumed that you have several categories. So for instance, using a training company, you might offer several trainings, and your trainings are grouped in categories. You might have accounting trainings, career development trainings, business development trainings, and so on. Now under each category, you have courses. So for instance, under accounting trainings, you might have a course that is titled Accounting 101, Introduction to Bookkeeping. Those are going to be the services, and they're all under the same category. So for this example, I'm going to use DesignVAT with design templates. So under categories, we have accounting templates, HR templates, and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and type accounting. To move to the next field, I can either click with my mouse, so I can click on the next field and supply values, or I can make use of the tab key on my keyboard. So the tab key will move me from my current field to the next field for data entry. So here I go ahead and enter the service. So here I'm going to list all the accounting templates we have. So this video is currently covering one, which is our income and expense tracker. And the price for the template is 10,000 Naira. So now to apply the 3 values for this data form, I can go ahead and click the enter key, and it's going to store this service to my database. So it tells me the service has been added. Once I click OK, you should see the service listed. Now you simply repeat this process to add additional services. There's no limits to the number of services that you can have. So clicking the Add Service button pops up the form, and then we'll repeat the process. This is equally going to be an accounting template, and you notice once I start typing A, the template will autofill using your previous entries. Moving to the next field, I make use of my tab key, and I enter another accounting template we have, which is our inventory management spreadsheet, and this has a base price of 7,000. Once I've supplied the 3 values, I click enter, and it tells me the service has been added. You notice now the 2 rows are populated. So each service is represented by a row. The first row, the income and expense tracker. The second row, the inventory management spreadsheet. So I'm going to click on this button and add a couple of other categories and services. So now I've added additional templates. I've added a total of 5 templates. So how did I do that? I click the Add Service button, it pops up the form, and then I fill the values. Now to save you from having to retype the service category, this is a drop-down list. So it will automatically populate using or listing it with all existing categories. So you notice the 3 categories we currently have, the accounting, HR, and admin, have been automatically listed here. So once you start typing, for instance, if I type H, it will autofill with the first category starting with H. In the same way, if I type A, it will autofill with A. There are 2 that start with A, accounting and admin. So I can either type D now, it's going to change it to the admin, or if I type A, if this is the correct, I can simply tab to the next field. And the template is dynamic, such as when you select accounting, the service is going to list all accounting templates only. So notice it lists only the 2 accounting templates we have, the income tracker and the inventory management spreadsheet. So if you start typing, once it autofills, you know you already have this service, so you don't have 2 services that have the same name. In the same way, if I change this to HR template and I tap to the next field, you will notice that it's going to list the 2 HR templates we have, which is the employee database and the attendance spreadsheet. So that way, if you start typing, once it autofills, you know that this is already existing, so you cannot have 2 services with the same name. Now, if you want to cancel the form, you simply click on the cancel key. So that's how you add service categories. To delete an existing service, you notice that each template is represented by a row. So the first row represents the income and expense tracker. The second, inventory management, and so on. So to delete any particular service, you simply click on the first cell in that row. So you notice as I click on this cell, it's highlighted. So you simply click on the cell, you notice it's highlighted, you click on delete, and the template is going to ask, are you sure you want to delete this service? It's equally going to list it. So project management spreadsheet. If you do, you click on yes. If you don't, you click on no. So notice if I click on yes, it's going to delete the project management spreadsheet from our database. So now we have only 4 templates. So that's a summary of how you use the service information section. You click the add service to add a new service. You supply the 3 values. When you're done, you click on enter and it's going to store it to the data table. To delete, you simply click on the first cell in that row. So notice I've clicked on this cell, it's highlighted. Once you click on delete, template is going to ask, are you sure you want to delete the attendance spreadsheet? If you do, you click yes. If you don't, you click on no. So next we move to the expense section of the template. Now to open it up, you simply click on the label expenses and that takes you to that section. You notice it has a similar formatting with the product section that we just covered. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the section title, which tells the user this is where you document all of your expenses. Now by expenses, we mean strictly business expenses. So your overhead costs like rent, utility, transportation, and other business expenses. To the right of this, we have 3 buttons. To add a new purchase, that's a new expense. To add payments when you're paying a vendor for a previous purchase. And to delete an existing expense. Above this, we have the navigation pane, and below this, we have the data table where all of your expenses are going to be listed. Now on the table, you notice that we have column headers, and these are the attributes that you're expected to supply. Now to add a new purchase or expense, you simply click on the Add Purchase button at the top, and this pops up a data form. So you notice just like the data form we saw before, the column headers are equally listed as labels. You simply have to supply values to the white portion of the form. Now, the first requirement is the expense date, and by default, Excel will enter today's date. So this is the day you're making the payment. So Excel is going to enter today's date using your computer date and time. However, you can modify the date portion, the month portion, or the year portion. Once you're done supplying the dates, to move to the next field, which is the status field, you can either click with your mouse, or you can make use of the tab key on your keyboard to conveniently move to that field. Now, the status field holds a drop-down list with 2 options. So this template supports 2 types of expenses, paid expenses and credit expenses. Now, as the name says, paid is when you're paying upfront, cash or bank payments. So pretty much you're not owing the supplier. And credit expenses are transactions whereby you're buying the goods on credit, or you're buying the service, or you're paying for the service on credit, so to pay at a later date. And the template will automatically calculate the total amount you're owing your suppliers at any point in time. So in the supplier section, which we're going to cover shortly, which is under reports, you'll be able to see the total amount you're owing each of your suppliers and the overall total across all of your suppliers. So for this first example, I'm going to assume this is paid. Move to the next field, and then here you indicate the expense type. Now this is a drop-down list also, and it has some defined types. Now to better understand this section, I would have to pause and move to one of the reports that the template generates so I can better explain indirect and direct costs. So there's several types of expense type. Some are explanatory, for instance, rent, salaries, transportation, but some like the cost of service you might not really be familiar with. So I'm just going to cancel this form and move on to the report section and do a bit of, accounting 101. So the report I'm going to cover is the P&L statement, which is the profit and loss statement. Now clicking on the report simply opens it up. Now the profit and loss statement is a financial report that pretty much summarizes your revenue, your expenses, and your costs over a period of time. Now that period of time can be a month, it can be a quarter, or it can be over the 12 calendar months. Pretty much you have the option to select the type of report you want to create, but the template, as the income and expense template, will automatically generate this statement for you. Once you come to this section, the next step is you select the type. For instance, if I select quarter, you notice the template will automatically list the 4 quarters in a year. The first quarter, which is January to March. The second quarter, April to June. The third, which is July to September. And the fourth, which is October to December. And once I click refresh, the template will automatically aggregate the total revenue I earned across the 4 quarters, the total cost I incurred across the 4 quarters, and the total expenses across the 4 quarters. In the same way, if I selected annual, you notice the template will list the 12 calendar months from January up until December. And if I click refresh, it's going to do the same thing, but this time around on a monthly basis. So now I can do month-to-month comparison. I can see if I earned more in January than February, if I'm progressing as a business, or if I'm retrogressing. So this way you can better appreciate your business data. Now, I'm going to cover the 3 sections of the P&L statements. The first section is the income section. Now, this is self-explanatory. This section will just tell you the total income. That's the total revenue you generated within that period. So here is going to be for January 2018, for February 2018, for March, and so on. So that's what the first section does. The total revenue you generate on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on the type you select at the top. Now, the second section, which is a section a lot of people might not be familiar with, is the cost of revenue section. Now, you're a service business. So in the course of offering your services, there's some costs you're going to incur. So the cost of revenue, these are the costs that are directly related with the revenue you generate or with the service you render. And that's why we call it a direct cost. So recall earlier on, I said we have direct and indirect cost in accounting. So your direct cost is the cost of revenue. This is the cost that is associated with delivering the service you render. Now, let me use a practical example so they can better understand. Let's assume that I'm a painter. So I paint buildings and structures and all of that. Now, in the month of January 2018, I get a gig to paint a 3-bedroom apartment for 1 million naira. So that means the template will say in revenue for January 2018, this will be 1 million naira. Now, to successfully paint this building, that's to offer this service, there's some costs that I'm going to incur. For instance, I need to buy buckets of paint. So let's assume that to paint this 3-bedroom, I need to buy 10 buckets of paint at a cost of 40,000. So I'm going to spend 400,000 to buy 10 buckets of paint to paint this 3-bedroom apartment. So that's a cost. And that cost is directly linked to this service that I'm rendering. I might also need to hire assistants, like 2 artisans, to help me also with the painting and the cleaning. Let's assume that I pay them, 33,000. So a total of 60,000 labor cost for the artisans that I'm going to employ to paint this 3-bedroom apartment with me. So that's an additional cost. So now 400,000 for material cost, which is the paints that I'm going to buy, and 60,000 for the labor cost, which is the artisans that are going to paint with me. Now, there might be other costs too. For instance, transportation. I might need to transport the paint bucket from the market to the person's house that I'm going to paint. So maybe I hire a truck or, a car, and I'm going to pay that 20,000. So that means in total, 480,000 from this 1 million that I earned is cost incurred. So that's what we call the direct cost, because that cost is directly linked to this job I got. If I didn't get this job, I won't buy the paint. If I didn't get this job, I'm not going to hire those 2 artisans. Neither am I going to hire the truck to transport the goods to the house I want to paint. So cost of revenue, these are the direct costs that are associated with the service that I render. Okay, and that's your cost. So here's going to tell you the total cost of revenue. Now, the next section, which is the expenses, this is the opposite. Well, not really the opposite, but this is indirect cost. These are costs that I'm going to expend regardless of whether I get this gig or not. So even if I didn't get this job to paint this 3-bedroom apartment, I'm still going to pay my office rent. I'm still going to pay myself salary. I'm still going to buy PHCN units for my office or fuel and diesel for my office generator. So there are some costs that I'm going to expend that are not directly linked to this service. So regardless of whether I get this gig or not, I'm probably going to spend this amount of money. So those are your indirect costs. So those are the three sections of the P&L statement. The income, which is money you earned, 1 million naira for the painter. The cost of revenue, which is 480,000, which is for the paint I'm going to buy, the brushes, the two artisans that are going to help me paint, the transport of the materials to the house. Those are all costs. The costs of incurring that revenue, of generating the revenue. So that's why it's called cost of revenue. The cost that I have to expend or that I incur in generating that revenue. So 1 million and then 480. Now the gross profit is basically the difference between your income and your cost of revenue. Now this is a very important metric. As to me anyways, I call this your true profit because this is going to tell you the total amount you earned when you've removed the cost. So in my bank statement, for example, it might show that 1 million naira entered. But that 1 million naira is kind of like a false narrative because from that 1 million naira, close to half of it, which is 480,000, transferred from me to the people that sell paints, to the artisans that are working with me, and the truck driver. So it didn't really enter my pocket. So if I'm going by this 1 million, it's quite confusing. So I'd rather go with the gross profit, which will tell me the total amount I earned after I've subtracted the cost that I incurred in generating that 1 million. So that's what the cost of profit does. Okay, so this is your direct cost. And then the indirect cost, as I said, is not directly related. Now, if you're not sure if an expense falls within direct or indirect, you just need to ask yourself the question, am I going to spend this money if I don't get this gig? So am I going to buy the 10 buckets of paint if I didn't get this job? No. So that means that this paint is directly linked with this job that I got. On the other hand, am I going to pay myself salary this month, even if I don't get this job? Most likely, because salary is, is recurrent. So most likely, I'm still going to pay myself salary. Most likely, I'm still going to be in my office and I'm going to pay my office rent. I'm not going to move out of my office this month, then come back next month. So your indirect cost or your overhead cost, these are costs that you spend most likely on a monthly basis, regardless of whether you get a gig or not. While the direct costs are costs that you spend only because of this gig. So it's because of this gig that I'm spending this amount, okay? So I hope I've better explained what the three categories are. Now, why it's important to understand the three categories is your cost of revenue is akin to, if I go to the expense section, at purchase, your cost of service here. So whenever you want to document an expense in the expense section, and that expense is directly linked to a service that you're rendering, you need to indicate cost of service here. So the template will be able to know that, okay, this cost is a direct cost. The only reason you're spending this amount is because of a job that you've gotten. Okay? And now for IT companies, you might ask, what is my cost of service? Well, for instance, DesignVAT cost of service can be the salary we pay to our Excel developers. So for instance, this template that I'm covering, the income and expense template, there's some developers that did the code and designing the entire template. So your salary will be under cost of service because that cost is directly linked to the development of this template. On the other hand, my other employees like customer service staff, accounting staff, and other, functions that are not directly linked to software development, they will be under salaries because they're indirect cost. The only reason why I'm paying this developer is because I need him to design this template, which I'm going to sell. However, I'm always going to pay my customer service rep every month. I'm going to pay my admin staff every month. So that's the difference between the two. So for an IT individual, those would be your cost of service. Also, for instance, Microsoft Excel subscription. So we had to subscribe for Microsoft Excel on a monthly basis to be able to design this template. So that will be a cost of service. Okay, so, depending on your industry, you need to sit down and look at what are the cost of service and what are my direct costs. And then once you've decided on that, it will be easier for you on a monthly basis to make use of this section. Okay, so when you're entering your indirect cost, that's straightforward. You either select advertising, office, rent, salaries, transport. And if it doesn't fall within the defined options here, you simply click on other. So other, all the options here except for cost of service are all indirect costs. The only direct cost here is cost of service. And once you indicate cost of service, the template will automatically aggregate that when generating your P&L statements as cost of revenue. Okay, so that's how the sections are linked together. So I hope I've been able to better explain that. Now I'm going to do a practical demonstration entering an actual expense. To add a business expense, you simply click on the Add Purchase or Add Expense button, and this pops up the form. So Excel is going to enter today's date by default. I'm going to leave that entry and move to the next field and indicate if I'm paying for this expense up front or if this is on credits. Now, for my first demonstrations, they're all going to be paid because I haven't yet added suppliers to my supplier section. Okay, so later on when I add suppliers, I'm going to demonstrate credit transactions. So I'm going to click on paid, move to the next field, and I'm going to indicate the expense type. So first I'm going to enter my rent. I'm going to click on rent, move to the next field, and here I'm going to give additional details pertaining to this category I selected. So we're in the month of March, so this could be my March office rents, and I just like put in the year. So this will be my March office rent for year 2018. Moving to the next field using either my tab key or clicking, I indicate the unit price. So how much am I paying for my March rent? So let's assume my monthly rent or office rent is 50,000 and I'm paying for only 1 month's quantity. The template will automatically calculate the total price, multiplying the two together. And lastly, I indicate a supplier name. Now this is optional. So if I want to indicate the supplier associated with this payment, I can go ahead and enter that. But recall I said my supplier section is blank because I haven't added suppliers to my supplier section. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank and click on enter. Once I do, it tells me the expense has been added, and we should see the first row populated. So you notice all the attributes that I supplied. So that's how you add an expense. Very easy. Just click on the add purchase. Template enters the dates. You can modify the date, the month, or the year. You can't enter a future date, however. Notice if I change this to 2019 and I attempt to leave, it tells me invalid date. So you can't enter a future transaction. You enter transactions as they occur. However, you can enter a past transaction. So if I enter 2017, no problem, but I can't enter a future transaction. So you enter transactions as at when they occur. I'm going to change this to 2018. I'm going to use the same date for most of my demonstrations. Next, I'm going to indicate this is also paid. And this time around, this will be my advertising. And here I'm going to be descriptive, giving details of this advertising. So this can just be my Facebook campaign, and I can just give details on the actual campaign. This can be for my accounting templates. And next I indicate the price or the amount I paid Facebook, and template calculates the total. I'm going to leave this blank and click on enter. So now I've successfully entered 2 expenses. You notice that each expense is represented by a row. So the first row represents my rent expense. The second row represents my advertising expense. And I simply repeat this process to keep adding expenses. So now these are indirect expenses, okay, based on my explanation before. So I've added 2 indirect expenses. Next, I'm going to add a direct expense. I'm going to use the same day. Now here I can just start typing P so that it just auto fills it for me to be faster. Now this is going to be a cost of service, okay? Recall this is a direct expense. And this can just be my March developers salary, because we pay the developers on a monthly basis for designing the templates, for troubleshooting, and overall, templates maintenance. Next, we indicate the price we're paying this March salary. And I'm just going to enter a fictitious amount. I don't know, let's say 250,000. And we're paying for only 1 month, so I'm going to enter only 1. So 250,000 is the total for the March developer salary. I click on enter, and it's going to store that direct expense. Okay? So now I've added 3 expenses, 2 indirect and 1 direct. So now quickly, just to show how the sections are interconnected, if I go to my reports and I go to my profit and loss statement, if I refresh this report now, we should see in the month of March the data I just entered. So you notice cost of revenue 250, which is the developer salary. It's a red because I have not earned any income, but I've spent this amount. So that's why we have a negative figure as our gross profit. Next, we have our expenses. That's the indirect cost. You notice the 20,000 we added for Facebook advertising. The 50,000 we added as our office rents. And if I scroll to the bottom, it tells us the overall total we've spent. That's total expense, 70,000. And at the bottom, we have our net ordinary income. Now, the net ordinary income is the difference. So your gross profit minus your expenses, and it's equally a negative figure because recall we have not added any income. Okay, so this just gives you that picture for the month of March. And other months are blank because we haven't added data across those calendar months. So that's how interconnected all sections are. So now going back to the expense section. So now we've added, I think, a total of 3 expenses. Each row represents an expense. So the first row is the rent. Second row is the Facebook campaign advertising. And the third row is the salary that we paid. Now recall I said, for instance, cost of service for an IT company, the developer we paid in March. Now I might want to equally pay my other employees. So maybe I have a payroll template that automatically calculated or has calculated total of my payroll, payee tax, and putting all those things into accounts. So here I'm just going to document the lump sum amount. So I'm just going to put the same date. This is equally going to be paid. Here now I'm going to indicate salaries. So salaries would be other employees that offer services, what we call auxiliary services, that are not directly linked to the services that we render. Okay, so this can just be, admin staff salary. And here I'm just going to put a lump sum amount, assuming another template has already calculated the total for me, accounting for allowances and all of that. So let's assume the total I paid for all of my employees, I don't know, it's 500,000. And The template is going to automatically calculate the total. I'm going to leave this blank and click on enter. So now I've added the fourth expense. Okay, so I hope I've better explained the difference between the direct and the indirect expenses. So that's a summary of how you use this section to add expenses. Now, I haven't made use of any credit transactions, so I've paid up front for all of these expenses. So later on, when we add suppliers, I'm going to come back to this section and demonstrate how you add payments for suppliers. And the last is to delete an expense. You simply click on the first cell. So I can click on the dates in this row. Notice it's highlighted. Once I click on delete, the template is going to ask, am I sure I want to delete the salaries, which is indeed salaries on this date. If I click yes, it's going to delete that salary. Notice that row is gone. So that's how you delete expenses. So the add purchase is to add, you fill all the categories. The delete expense is to delete an existing expense. So that covers the expense section. As I said, I'm going to come back and explain how to use this functionality. Next, we go to the sales section. So this is income received. So we've documented cash outflow when cash is leaving your account. Now we're going to explain cash inflow when cash is coming in. So to do that, we'll simply click on the label sales, and that takes us to the sales section of the template. So now we're in the sales section. Okay, this is where you document revenue information. So as money comes in, you document it here. Now, the sales section supports documenting two types of data. First of all, you can generate an estimate. So it's possible that clients might call and just require an estimate. They might not necessarily make a payment now or ever. So you might just want to generate an estimate, and this section supports that. And you can also add sales. That's when you actually receive income. Now you notice we have three buttons here: to add a new sale, delete an existing sale, and to create an invoice. Now the invoice functionality is used to create both an invoice and an estimate. Above this, we have the navigation pane. Below this, we have the data table where all of your sales and estimates are going to be listed. Now to add a new sale or estimate, you simply click on the add sales button. Once you do, it pops up a form. And the template will automatically enter today's date as the sales date. However, you can modify the day, the month, or the year. Now, just to show how this works, I'm just going to backdate. So for instance, I can change the dates to the 7th of March. So you can change any of the three portions. The only thing you cannot do is enter a future date. As if you do, the template is going to say invalid date. But you can backdate or you can use today's date. Next, you indicate the status. Now, the status here is where you're going to tell the template that is this an estimate or is this an actual sale and I've received cash. So if you click on pending here, the template is going to store this as an estimate. So it's not going to add this to your reports, to your income generated. The data is just going to be there just for the sake of storing the data. But if you click on paid, it's going to count this as revenue generated. Okay, so that's the difference. If you're generating an estimate, which is my first example, I simply click on pending. So that means this order is pending. The client has not paid, and I'm not sure if the client is even going to pay. So once you click on pending, you move to the next field, and here you indicate the customer name. Now, we haven't yet added customers to our database, so you notice this drop-down list is blank. But later on, once I add customers, you notice I can automatically select the customer from the drop-down list. But since we have no customers, I'm just going to go ahead and type the customer's name. Move to the next field, I'm going to indicate the service category. Now, recall service categories from our product section. So this is going to list all service categories in our database, and we have only two: the accounting templates and the HR templates. And recall, as I demonstrated earlier, once you select the category type, once you move to the next field, the template will list only templates in this category. So notice here it lists only our accounting template, which is the income tracker and the inventory management spreadsheet. In the same way, if I had selected HR and I tap to the next field, it's going to list only HR templates that we supply, which is the employee database and the attendance. Now, the reason for this functionality is just to shorten the length of this drop-down list. So the items displayed here are subject to your selection above. So what you select in the category determines the services that are listed. And once you select a service, once you tab away, the template will automatically extract the price as you entered in the product section. So that way you don't need to manually enter that. The template will automatically enter the price. Once you enter the quantity, so how many units of this template am I selling? If it's only one, the template will automatically calculate the VAT, which is 5% of the total. So 5% of 7,000 and the total, which is 7. So the client now is expected to pay a VAT of $350 and a total of $7,000 for the spreadsheet. So all I need to do now is to click on enter, and I've stored this estimate. Recall I said this is an estimate because in the status column, I selected pending. So if you click on pending, this is an estimate. So if I go to my reports and I click on my profit and loss statement, you see for revenue, it's still going to be 0 in the month of March because I haven't earned any revenue. I only entered an estimate, okay? So that's how the estimate functionality works. So this is an estimate because I indicated pending. To add another estimate, I repeat the process. I simply click on add sales, indicate the day, The status is going to be pending if it's an estimate. The customer's name, since I don't have customers in my database, I need to retype. The service category, this time around I'm going to use accounting, and I'm going to indicate the service name, which is the income and expense tracker. Tells me this template is 10,000 Naira. Let's assume I'm selling 2 units of the template. The template tells me the total is 20 that the client is expected to pay, and the VAT, which is 5%, is 1,000. Once I click enter, it's going to store that estimate in my database. So now I have 2 estimates stored. The first row represents the first estimate, which is the employee database template, and the second row represents the second estimate, which is the income and expense tracker. So that's how you add estimates. Now let's assume that I want to generate an estimate that's an actual invoice to send to the client. So all I need to do is, notice now we have 2 transactions. I simply click on the customer name of that transaction. So for instance, if I want to generate an estimate for this employee database template, I simply click on this row random here. Notice it's highlighted. Then I simply click on generate invoice. And the template will automatically generate an invoice